I sure as heck did not want my future to be as troubling, financially speaking, as my past. I wanted a bigger future than I currently experienced in my present.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Cashflow podcast. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, it's Agostino. As real estate entrepreneurs, we're always seeking to increase our net worth and have, of course, build up our business. And part of that is using the bank on yourself concept. And today's guest, he's very, very familiar with that concept. Now, he did everything that we were all told to do when we were young and growing up. We're told to invest in your 401k, your mutual funds, your IRAs. But then when he's back in 2008, he saw people just lose everything, right? And this whole concept of investing, this whole concept of using and leveraging other capital came up for him. And he decided to make that his primary focus. And by using that formula, he's able to achieve some great success for himself. And now today he uses the bank on yourself concept as another approach to help people build their own personal net worth. So he's a #1 best-selling author. He is also the host of the Not Your Average Financial podcast. And he is also the CEO of Lake Growth Financial Services. Now with all that, let's welcome Mark Willis to the show. Hey, Mark, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Agostino, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming on. So please tell the listeners a little bit more about you and what you do.
Well, I'm not your average financial planner, that's for sure. I didn't get a degree in finance. It was a totally different area of life, but I had the good fortune, we could say, of graduating in 2008 with my wife and I had 3 private school degrees between us, with no job, with no real prospects for work in the midst of the Great Recession, if you recall, and no plan to pay off that 6 figures of student loan debt we accumulated over the years. So that, Agostino, is a great way to start out life. Let me tell you, man. I kind of jokingly say I married 2 women in college. My wife, my beautiful wife, of course, and Sally Mae. She came along for the ride. Uh, and we wanted her out of the relationship as fast as we could. Now, fast forward to 2021, where we're all dealing with this terrible coronavirus, and we're starting to see it in the rearview mirror. We shall see, fingers crossed. But I'm watching millions and millions of people unemployed, more and more people unable to come up with rent or mortgage payments. The cyclical nature of financial crisis is more apparent to me now than it's ever been. When I have meetings with people on Zoom or over the phone, it's a pretty common occasion for us to hear either one of 2 stories. Mark, this has been the best year of my life, financially speaking, or Mark, this has been the most terrible year of my life, financially speaking. It's a bifurcated experience that we're all going through right now. And I think part of the reason what got me into finance was to take the problem of our financial disaster when terrible things come, and like financial judo, I guess, we turn that into a strength. How can we take the terrible or troubling effects of market volatility or massive amounts of debt on our shoulders and not just get rid of the problem, but actually leverage it to turn it into the greatest asset or greatest opportunity of our financial life? That's what got me pumped. That's what got me excited enough to quit my career, my W 2, and get into something that changes people's lives, start the business, Lake Growth Financial. That's what got me to get my CFP and to pursue this path.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So now you got these people that are calling you every day, and they have this bifurcated 2 different scenarios from your clients. Now the people that are experiencing the worst, let's talk about those guys first, okay? What sort of things are they encountering, and how did they ill prepare for what's currently going on? Because I mean, sure, what's going on today with all this Corona stuff is it's happening. It'll eventually go away, but there's going to be another one. We don't know what it's going to be, the next recession, but it comes in cycles. Unfortunately, that is a sign of an actual healthy economy, in my opinion, and that's also when
Right.
the opportunities appear. So, but how do those guys? What did they do to really put them in that position, and what should they have done?
Well, there's what they did and what's being done to them, but I agree with you, man. I think in general, you either make excuses or you can make an income, and there's really it's difficult to find the difference there. You're right. We could not have handled a financial drizzle, but in 2020 March, we got a financial downpour, and it's been on us ever since. It has not let up for many Americans. Back in 2019, the last year we have full data, 47% of American households had less than $400 saved, according to Federal Reserve studies. And 31% of Americans had no retirement savings at all or pension. And 27% of those folks were 60 years old or older. So that's a crisis waiting to happen. Talk about dry kindling. And again, if all we needed was a little if the financially rainy day scenario is sort of coming to mind here, if we just had a couple of drips on our head, we would have drowned because we did not have any kind of preparations. But what we got was a flood of terrible economic situations. Now, the good news is other people were ready and waiting more than maybe was even comfortable. They were sitting on liquid opportunity funds, assets on the balance sheet, things that they could convert quickly into cash or cash equivalents that would allow them to scoop up and take advantage of opportunities and deals, to be the best buyer on the block for their properties and to bank on themselves. So that's really what distinguished the people who were ready from the people who weren't. And people who relied too heavily on their bank, I think we're going to see one more time. It's been three major market corrections since the beginning of the century, 2020. Now that we're 20 years in, we've already had three major market collapses. And I agree with you, man. I think those are healthy, and they're called corrections for a reason. So with those three in our rearview mirror, the key question is, do you think there's going to be more market corrections in your lifetime? And if
Right.
so, what are you going to do about it? Do you want to have happen to you next time what happened to you this time or last time? I sure as heck did not want my future to be as troubling, financially speaking, as my past. I wanted a bigger future than I currently experienced in my present. So I looked and searched and found strategies financially, as well as mindset shifts that got me to think bigger and to take on applicable tactics and strategies that allowed me to take control of my financial future. Go figure, right? Go figure that we could actually control our financial outcomes before they even happen to us.
That's right. That's one of the great things of being human. We can actually plan this stuff out, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
exactly. Yeah.
But it sounds to me then that there's three major things, right? Number one, not having enough savings. Number two, not really taking on way too much debt. And number
Mhm.
three, not being prepared for the rainy day in terms of the whole banking on yourself concept. So, to attack number one, taking on way too much debt. That means getting into, say, a personal residence that's way too much house for what you can afford that relies too heavily on a job, for instance, right? Maybe that could be one thing. I mean, I'll let you answer that.
Mhm.
But and number two, it sounds to me like they just didn't have any savings either because they're living so close to the edge because of number one. But number three is a very interesting concept in that you're able to bank on yourself using different tools to of course borrow against that money and go and take advantage of opportunities. So do you want to maybe we should focus on these three things?
Sure, that's great. You'll have to help me remember all three. I must be in Garfield zone after lunch, I guess. But the first was debt. So thank you, Agostino. The first, you're right. Okay, so we're all looking forward to and anticipating, and hopefully, prayerfully, this vaccine will be a part of the solution for a lot of people this year. Uh, think of that injection. It's not so much the rate; it's the volume that counts. It does not matter whether that injection goes in slow or fast. What matters is that you get the right amount. Let's if you don't like that metaphor, let's talk about food. It's not how fast I eat my dinner, it's how much food or little food I'm eating that will matter in terms of my weight control in my body, right? Got with me so far? So many people have a low interest mortgage, a low interest car loan, low interest student loans, credit cards at 0%, HELOC at 3%, you get the picture. Even if the weighted average is 8%, let's say, of their overall debt load, but the volume of their debt is on average, according to the US Commerce Bureau, is 37%. So the average American spends 37% of his or her income just servicing debt payments. Now, it's the volume that will kill us or save us. Banks know this. That's why they're offering such cheap rates, in addition to the Fed lowering rates, of course. But banks are willing to offer such low rates because we take on that bigger house. We take on that second house, that boat. You get the picture. It's the volume that wipes us out. And so banks know this, and that's why banks win. They've won for thousands of years. Agostino, there's a great book out there. I recommend folks at least read the title of the book if you don't read the whole thing. The title of the book is Debt, the First 5,000 Years. The first 5,000 years. Do you get the picture there? That's the truth. Banks live and function in human society as long as we've had a human civilization. They're as old as cave paintings, as far as I'm concerned. And banks have figured out how to be profitable in every market economy. In fact, the more they lower the rate, Feds, that is, the Federal Reserve, the more they lower the rate, the more profits banks enjoy. Now that's counterintuitive to a lot of people. They think, well, if I'm paying my credit card at 15% instead of 18%, banks must be losing money. No, they make more money when the rates are lower. When they're closer to zero, banks actually earn more. I'll save that for another podcast, but the math is there. So bottom line is, if the problem in our life, if a third of our day is going to be a slave to a bank, if that's the outcome of the average American, 37% of your income just financing and servicing debt, if that's the problem, I mean, think about that as in terms of time. If time is money, what is 37% of your day, Augustino? What's 37% of my day? In that case, banks own me if I'm the average American. Now, thank God I'm not your average American. I don't want to be average. I want to be awesome. But if I'm the average American, that means banks would own me for a third of my day, then throw taxes on top of that. And I don't care if you're an employee or a solopreneur or a business investor, you're working for the bank and the government half your day on average.
Oh, probably more
So
than that. Yeah, probably
yeah,
more
yeah, at
than that.
least half. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
so I'll meet you in the Cayman Islands, I guess, or the other option, if you don't, if you want to stay on this on the right side, I guess, is learn to take that problem and again flip the script. Think like a banker. If banks are doing that to you and me and the average Joe, how can you be the banker? Banking is just a verb. There's no morality to that. The problem is we don't have the right person behind the banker's desk. We need to sit behind that banker's desk. What if you could bank on yourself instead of letting all these other banks take it out of your pocket? What if you could recapture some or all of that time and money and actually profit from the major purchases you have to make in life? We all operate in the banking business. Even if we think we're a bank, even if we think we're a real estate investor or a dentist or a doctor, we're all in the banking business because we all make major purchases. Even if we just pay cash for things, we're still financing everything we buy, which we can talk more about if you want to.
Yeah.
But bottom line is, you know, if you can overcome the problem of debt and learn to bank on yourself, everything else becomes easier by default.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's get back to that one in a second, because so aside from that angle, we also have not having enough savings as well,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
that means, of course, not having not saving enough for a storm, right?
Hmm.
So the first
Yep.
one was taking on too much debt. Now it's not taking on savings. Then we can get into the banking yourself concept. But so I mean, aside from just putting money aside, I mean, what other sort of tips and tricks would you recommend for our listeners?
Wow, well, tips and tricks are kind of fun because they're practical and easy to do. I'd say most people have the upside down inverted financial pyramid where we've got 500 bucks in our savings account, whatever, 1,000 bucks, whatever, in our savings accounts, and we've got all of our money tied up in our homes and our 401ks. And so when that troubling time comes, we have to use a credit card or a bank loan or a HELOC, or worse, the bank of mom and dad, to bail ourselves out, or the government too. So, by having some tips and tricks that can help you save more, here's two. Here's just two quick tips to flipping your pyramid right side up, where you've got most of your pyramid money. It's safe and liquid cash as the foundation of your pyramid, and then moving up the scale to more speculative, less liquid investments. Okay, so if most of our money's at the bottom is liquid, predictable, accessible, tax advantaged money, then we can afford to take risks with the top of our financial pyramid because if it blows away, no big deal. We still got our foundation. Okay. So here's two ways you can increase your savings right now. Step one, set a plan to save more tomorrow. This is backed by Nobel Prize winning economist uh, Richard Thaler, who came up with the idea of save more tomorrow. Great concept. You can do this in a bank account, a 401k, or any of the bank on yourself strategies we talk about, where you can actually send your paperwork in to increase your savings, okay, every quarter or every month by 1%. So I can't save more today, right now. I'm going to force myself to start saving 1% more every quarter for the next 10 quarters, let's say, for example. And so that means automatically you've already submitted the paperwork to increase your savings. And by default, unless you act on it, you will begin to save more in the future. It's a great way. It's sort of like saying, hey, I'll diet tomorrow. It's a great way to commit without having to actually feel the pain immediately. So that's a mind shift, a mind trick. Another tip for saving more is to let the deposit of your bank, of your payroll, of your paycheck, excuse me, to let your paycheck hit your savings account rather than let it hit your checking account. So if you let it hit your savings account, you can move that money to your checking account and spend it rather than letting all of your income hit your checking account, spend, 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 and then save what's left. That usually ends in disaster for most folks. Rather, flip the script and let that money hit your savings account, then move stuff over weekly or whatever to your spending account. That way, you, again, by default, will just save more on just a human behavior perspective. So, those are two quick tips on saving more using the concept of the financial pyramid. Augustino, did anything there? I'm sure I said something that didn't make sense. Any questions on that?
No, no. I mean, it's actually very consistent with some of the things that I've recommended for people to do as well. It's kind of like the whole concept of pay yourself first.
Pay yourself first.
The money comes in, you're making sure that you have enough money to pay your own overhead before you do anything else with it, as opposed to do what
Hmm.
you said, just dump it into your ATM card account
Yep.
and oh, good, I see X amount of dollars in this account. I'm just going to start spending it. Then you trail it all the way down to almost zero. Then you're praying for the next paycheck to come in, and
Right.
that is just not a good way to live. And that and in order to become, in my opinion anyway, to piggyback on what you just said, in order to become that real estate entrepreneur that many of our listeners want to become, cash management becomes super, super, super important. Because if you're, whether you're doing it for yourself or you're doing your own deals or you're leveraging someone else's cash in terms of an investor, you have a fiduciary responsibility to them not to, of course, not to blow away cash, right? They're supposed to do
Hmm.
that, right? And they want to see, and you want to see too, that you're going to be responsible with that money, So uh, that's no, it's great. That's great, Mark. So now let's go into then the whole bank on yourself concept. So how do you recommend people? First off, maybe go into a little bit of deeper description. What does that mean exactly? I know you mentioned that the individual becomes the banker, right? That's fine and
Hmm.
dandy. In what regard are you talking about setting that up? Like, what's entailed with that, and what are some of the benefits with that?
Well, yeah. So maybe it even touches slightly on number two. Where you save your money matters. Um, when I put my money into a hedge fund or a syndication deal or a 401k or a savings account, my money acts different. When I put a fish in the wrong environment, it'll die. When I put my fish in a microwave, it's not going to last very long. But if I put my fish in a warm, temperature controlled, well fed aquarium, it's going to multiply. It's going to be a happy little fish. It's going to have lots of little baby happy fishies all over. The same is true with our money. Where you keep your money makes it act different. That's such a brain dead obvious sentence, but it's so important for every listener to really think carefully about what you want your money to do for you, because where you keep it will make it act different. And if you control the environment where your money lives, you'll win. If a bank or a government or an employer controls the environment where your money lives, they'll win. Again, by default. So, maybe I'm lazy, maybe I'm just thinking about a great Peter Drucker quote. He said, "Nothing is more useless than to work on making something more efficient, that which should not be done at all." You ever heard that quote before,
Oh yeah,
Augustino?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so, how many people are doing useless things with their money and thinking they're just trying to get that higher rate of return in their mutual funds? How many Americans? How many tens or hundreds of millions of Americans? A recent study by Boston College Center for Retirement Research says that 51% of America will be in a lower standard of living in retirement than they were before retirement. That
wow,
means that half of all Americans, it was a huge waste of time to defer their taxes.
yeah,
And, um, because they're in a higher bracket after they retire. And the other half, they didn't get ready for retirement. So it was a lose lose to defer those taxes. Okay, so back to your question. Where can I keep my money such that by putting it there, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? Great. Another great question by who's the guy? Gary Keller. What can I do with my money such that by putting it in that specific spot, it'll make the rest of my financial life easier or unnecessary? I was trying to figure this question out myself as I was building my business, as I was paying off my student loan debt, as I was just generally preparing for life in my late 20s. I really wanted to think carefully about my characteristics. What did I need? What attributes did I want money to have in my life? To me, I had a couple of kind of my wish list. If I could just wave a magic wand, I wanted, guarantees that the money would be there. I didn't want to go looking for it and it be, halfway to Tahiti or something. I wanted it to be tax free and accessible to me before I was 59 and a half or any age. Who would want to wait for some magical half birthday before you could really use your money? I wanted it to be, really liquid and with the kind of protections and also a competitive rate of return at the same time. So I was looking for a long laundry list, and also I wanted in real estate. I really need it to be protected from creditors and predators because honestly, lawsuits are a dime a dozen, unfortunately, in our industry. So, and as a certified financial planner, I also wanted something that could help my clients sleep well at night. So anyway, I stumbled across the bank on yourself concept. And, of all things, Augustino, it uses an old fashioned but modernized whole life insurance contract. So, of all things in the financial universe, I never thought I'd be talking about life insurance as a place to save money. It would have been like saying, "Hey, use your dental insurance policy to save for retirement." It just didn't make sense to me as someone that didn't know much about life insurance as a financial management tool. It just didn't compute to me. So as I got into this, it became more and more compelling to me, both as a business owner and as a real estate investor, and just as a person. So I'll share a few key characteristics, and then I'll hush, and you just take it wherever you want to go. But I do believe now, having looked at this for over a decade, that it can be the smallest hinge in your financial life that'll swing the biggest doors open for you in terms of opportunities. So here's what a bank on yourself type whole life policy lets you do. It builds liquid cash value, meaning I can access the money while I'm still alive, thank God, for any purpose. It's accessible money. I can fix up my own kitchen, or I can rehab or flip another property. I can send my kids to Disney World, or I can send them to college. It's my money. I can do whatever I want with it. It's liquid, accessible cash. I can be 29 and a half years old, 59 and a half years old, or 99 and a half years old, and it's liquid, accessible cash with no government penalties or taxes to get the money out. Now, that's enough right there for me to perk up and pay attention. But there's a few more pieces to it. It grows at a competitive rate. It's not going to wow you with double digit returns, but it's a predictable and even guaranteed growth on the money every single year. To give you some idea, it depends on the age and person's health and all that, but it's in the middle single digits in terms of net after expenses internal rate of return. So no taxes due on that return, and it's going to be a modest single digit yield. So I don't look at this as my investment. It's not. Whole life insurance is my cash equivalent in my portfolio. It's kind of the part of the portfolio at the bottom of the financial pyramid. To go back to that for a minute, it's my liquid, safe, predictable cash that's earning better than a savings account by a long shot, and it's liquid, so I can use it for the top of my pyramid to take advantage of opportunities, investments, and more. Okay, so that's two. There's only two more, I promise. The third it is available to me for income distributions, and if we design it correctly, it'll be 100% income tax free throughout my retirement years. So it's a lot like a Roth IRA, but without any of the government restrictions of Roth IRAs. I've got clients putting in several $100,000 a year into one of these with no taxes due anticipated when they retire. So that's incredible. Some people call this the rich person's Roth. And finally, and maybe most importantly for real estate investing, the policy can be used like a bank. So, in the event that I see a great deal on a storage unit or a multifamily or again a flip, I just helped a couple who do a number of flips on antique homes. Uh, if I saw a deal that I wanted to take advantage of, I can use my policy as collateral. I can borrow against the policy and use the insurance company's money, OPM, to go and invest in that real estate deal. I'm using my life insurance cash value as collateral for a loan, and the policy, and this is very important, will continue to grow as if I had not touched a dime of the money. So to
Mm.
use those figures just very quickly, let's say I've got pick a number. Let's say I've got $100,000 of cash value, and I just borrow out 30,000 bucks to do whatever, buy a car, invest, whatever. That year, I'll still get the full increase, the guaranteed increase plus the dividends on the entire 100,000 bucks as if I hadn't borrowed the 30 grand out. My money's doing two things at once. So those
Wow.
four key pieces are, in my opinion, a great tool in the tool belt for building a financially stress-free life.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there. Let's take it to a very practical example then. All right. Let's say for instance, there's a whole life policy then, right? This and you want to buy a whole life policy with say $30,000. All right, we'll keep it small, $30,000. So you're telling me then that if I wanted to go and buy a house or for whatever for 30K, I can basically use this money from the bank on yourself concept, for instance, go and buy the house, and then maybe I'm going to flip it and I'm going to sell for 45. Am I going to get taxed on that money? Am I like how does that whole scenario how does that play
Mhm.
out in the whole bank on yourself concept?
Well, yeah, great question. So let's talk about a real life example. So the example you gave of 30,000, you borrowed against your policy 30 grand. You put it into the real estate deal, and you started fixing up the floors and the bathrooms and all that. And then you sold it, and you got a profit for what was it,
Say
45? So
yeah, say 45. Yeah,
15,000. So you
yeah,
got a profit of 15 in that case.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So your policy was the source of money. Now I always ask myself, compared to what? It's a great question to ask when you're evaluating options. Compared to what? Is this a good deal? Compared to what? So what else could I have done? I could have borrowed from a bank for that 30,000. And now what? Now I'm on their their call list to make sure I'm paying them every month, and the interest goes to them. And if I skip a few payments, they're going to repo my house that I'm trying to flip. Even if I can't sell that house in time, or if I have trouble with my, builder or whatever, I'm on the hook. It's my head, if I don't come up with that payment and if I don't get the bank what they demand. Okay, so that's one option. We're all fairly familiar with that. Besides that, what's the old Mark Twain quote? A banker is a fellow who will lend you his umbrella when the sun shines, and then he wants it back as soon as it starts to rain.
Yeah.
So the problem with banks are they're never really a great friend of yours when you desperately need the cash, whether for a great deal. When markets are crashing, that's when usually you can find the best deals, and the banks are least likely lending. Or when you're in trouble, they're not really excited about lending you a bunch of money. So that's kind of off the table for at least some scenarios. Now that I still use a bank for other scenarios, but for my convenience rather than the other way around. Now the other way to buy that property, that flip that you mentioned, is just save in a savings account and then pay cash for the deal. Okay, so that's great, but there's a few problems there too. One, every time I spend money out of a savings account, it stops growing. I lost the growth of that dollar in my money market or savings account. Now it's simply and purely inside the drywall of that property I just bought down the street. And I can only hope that I can sell it for a profit. But my money's only doing one job. And I personally want my money to do as many jobs for me as possible, if I can. So the problem is you finance everything you buy because when you pay cash for something, you're passing up the interest you could have earned on that money had you not bought the house and left it invested or did something else with the cash. That's the opportunity cost that a lot of folks are familiar with. So the third way to do it is to use the policy loan. Borrowing against the life insurance does not spend down your asset. It simply collateralizes it. Okay, so we access the cash value via loan. We put that loan money to work, getting yield on our flip. The policy is still earning 5% or whatever it's earning inside your policy. And let's say I didn't do the math here, but I don't know how long it took us to flip that property. But let's say you got a 15% yield over a couple years or whatever, I guess. You got that $15,000 profit. That's a great double dip. That's your money doing two things at once, isn't it? My money's in the policy. My money's working in my property. That's a great return. That's an increased yield without any additional market risk, right?
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
there's some downsides. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go into the
Yeah.
downside. I was just going to ask you about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I don't recommend folks just rush out and go get this thing. Here's a few things to keep in mind.
Right.
One, there's some insurance costs when you set up a life insurance policy. Now, these are not like the kind Dave Ramsey likes to yell about on his radio show. They're way more efficient. There's a whole heck of a lot less commissions paid to the agent, which is probably why it's not common to find these out in the wild. And a lot of people think they have these policies when they don't. Unfortunately, Agostino, I got to say, it's not unlike when you go to the grocery store and you sometimes see the USDA organic label at the grocery store. Right next to that label is something that might be said like natural or pure. Those other words have no regulation, essentially. What you really have to look for is the label. If you want USDA organic and you get it, you know that that is a particular set of standards that food went through to have that label. Unfortunately, there's nothing like that except one program that I'm aware of in the United States and Canada where you know for sure that your whole life policy has that stamp of approval. And that is the Bank on Yourself Professionals program. I went through that program. That's why I went through it. I wanted that kind of standard seal of approval. I felt like I couldn't do this type of work as a certified financial planner unless I had that kind of approval. There's only about 200 professionals that have that standard on their business cards and email signatures, and it's the program that I had to go through to obtain that credential. So I've seen a lot of people who thought they had Bank on Yourself whole life. Turns out their whole life policy was actually an indexed universal life policy, or worse, a variable life insurance policy tied to the stock market, taxable to them in the future, growing way too slowly. So I would say be aware of that. That's more of a consideration than a downside. But it's kind of a wild west in terms of the nomenclature out there: infinite banking, private wealth reserve, family banking. There's a lot of nicknames out there. You really want to make sure you're working with a good advisor who knows what he or she is doing. um, like I said, so there are insurance costs. You can work with the wrong advisor who just googled this last week. um, and I would say it's not supposed to be a get rich overnight tool. It's a long-term financial tool. It grows, nice and predictably, but it's going to be modest and it might even bore you to tears in terms of the return. So don't look into this as an investment alternative. It's really just a cash parking space in between your deals. That's the best way I look at it.
Right, right, right. And how does this differ from like a self-directed IRA where you're still able to self-direct that money, but in a self-directed IRA that money is going back into that account. This sounds like totally different then.
Yeah. 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 There's some pros and cons. Like everything, you don't want to just dump every last penny into self directed IRA or whole life insurance. So let's talk about it. Uh, I like the idea of self directed. That sounds good. And you're right. There are some advantages to self directed IRAs. What do I lose with a self directed IRA? I lose all of the tax advantages of real estate, and they are plenty. There are lots of great ways to take advantage of tax advantages within the real estate asset class. Why would I give that up if I care about paying taxes as little as possible, legally, that is? Um, I would also say, you're looking at if it's a tax deferred self-directed IRA, you're looking at a scenario where you might be deferring all of the wonderful work you're doing into a future by which the government will decide to take more of your future than they would take of your present. What do I mean by that? When I sit down with people one on one over Zoom or over the phone, I ask them every single one. I say, "Hey, what do you think? It doesn't matter what I think, Mr. Client. What do you think? Are taxes likely to be lower or higher in your future?" And they, to a person, they will say, "Mark, I think taxes over a long term are going to go up." And I say, "Well, okay, tell me about your self-directed traditional IRA. What's your understanding of the taxation of that IRA?" And most of them have it figured out that, oh yeah, it's going to get taxed in the future. And so I say, "Well, sir, do you want to pay those taxes at a higher rate? If you're successful in real estate and if taxes go up, do you want to pay those extra taxes?" And even if taxes are 1% higher, it makes more mathematical sense to pay our taxes now, which is what we do when we put it into a whole life policy or a Roth IRA, than to wait until the future. Deferring a problem like a root canal only makes it worse. So that's, I guess, one key piece to this. Also, with self-directed IRAs, you can't really, use the money for personal needs. If my family needs a new, second story on my house or a kitchen upgrade, or if my kid needs to go to college, my self-directed IRA can't help me with that. But my whole life policy is fully liquid and available for any purpose I have.
Nice.
There's
And
more to it, but that's probably enough.
but and I think one thing you said though, it isn't like you're exclusive. You can only do one of these
That's
two
right.
things. You
Mhm.
can't do both, and it's different tools for different things.
And
So
in fact, I'll tell you there's a magically perfect number you should have in tax deferred money, and feel free to use your self-directed IRA up to that specific magic number. Bottom line is if you take out what's the standard deduction right now for tax purposes? I think it's like 25,000 for couples.
I
Let's
believe
see.
so.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So you can take as much as 25 grand out of an IRA every year and there's no taxes due on that money. So that's a perfect number to keep in your IRA. A couple $100,000, 300,000 bucks would be a great amount to keep in a self-directed IRA, and then put more into a life insurance policy as an alternative or a diversification play to keep you in the 0% tax bracket, which is my favorite tax bracket to be in.
Mine too. And it sounds like you've helped other people set these types of tools up, right? And that's what your firm actually does, right?
Yeah, that's right. We set them up. We do quite a few IRAs when necessary. We have certainly helped folks with the bank on yourself concept, as I believe it's a tool that's underrepresented in this country. Like I said, most people don't have $400 in liquid cash. We need to change that, Agostino. Let's start a revolution. So yeah, we help folks set this up.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, good. So, guys, definitely give Mark a call if you're really interested in the banking yourself concept. Even if you have questions for him, by all means, reach out to him. I think that something you ought to at least consider as part of your portfolio of wealth creation, and of course, wealth holding, right? Because it sounds to me like it's one big tool you can leverage to start buying other assets. That's what it sounds
Yep.
like. So, Mark, tell me your piece of bulletproof advice. Maybe someone gave you some information in the past and really helped change your life. What would you have to say to that?
Well, I will say again, I'll give two very quick. One, banking just is. And so bank on yourself. Otherwise, someone else is going to bank on you instead. So that's the first piece. The second is nothing is as important as you think it is while you're thinking about it. I'm going to say that again because that's kind of a tongue twister. Nothing is as important as you think it is while you're thinking about it. And that's been kind of a mind blowing fact for me lately. But if you really stop and think about it, how often do we get anxious over stuff that does not matter? Over stuff we can get past. Nothing is as important as you think it is while you're thinking about it. Things look bigger when you're staring at them. Problems look bigger when you're staring at them. Opportunities look bigger when you're staring at them. So take a moment to reflect and step away, breathe, sleep on it. You know, whether it's a relationship you're having to fight for or a deal you're trying to evaluate, take a little space and remember that nothing is as important as you think it is while you're thinking about it. So that's my key piece of bulletproof advice. Yeah, thank you, Agostino, so much for having me on your show. You're an amazing guy and you're doing amazing things for your audience. If folks want to dig in deeper into learning more about this strategy, they can go to bit.ly/Mark Banking. That's MARK banking, BANKING. So, love to speak with folks, and you can hop on my calendar right there and we can start a conversation.
Love it, love it. Hey, especially for your action people out there, we tend to like rush into things very, very quickly. I'm one of those guys. Sometimes,
Hmm.
it helps to take a step back and really truly understand those opportunities or those risks or the seemingly small things could actually be a big deal and vice versa. So, no,
Right.
love it. All
Yeah.
right, guys. Well, if you guys want to take advantage of the banking yourself concept, give Mark a call. It sounds to me like it's something, again, like I said a second ago, something you should add to your portfolio. It's one of my personal goals as well for 2021 is to use this banking yourself concept too. So it's really, really great stuff. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you next episode. Take care.
Hey, Agostino here, and I would love to connect directly with you. Text the word books to 202-410-4202 to receive weekly book recommendations from me.